Hey folks. Hey. It's like an embarrassment of riches. I'm back at it again. So hold on, let's see. Kayla. Hey everybody.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing really well. So all right folks, I'm Therese Nelson, back at it again. If you all were with us at the 1 o'clock hour, got to talk with my friend David Stample. And it's an embarrassment of riches today because we have the pleasure of talking with the very brilliant newly minted master's degree uh, recipient from NYU, brilliant multimedia journalist Kayla Stewart.
Oh, you're too kind. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Um, this is I think my second or third time talking to someone who is about to blow us all away and come back on the platform as a host. So this is a very cool opportunity for us all to fall in love with your work and to get more into who you are, what you do, and the kind of conversations you are going to bring us here on Black Food Folks. So I want to just get right into it because I was deep diving into your work and was not realizing that so many of the stories of the last like year or so. I feel like the year you were there, but so many stories on Upworthy that I was loving and referencing
Mm.
were yours, and I was like, oh shoot. Um, but I think I'm really fascinated by this conversation because this notion of storytelling and the function of storytelling is something that kind of I think calls chefs often, but we don't really frame it that way.
Right.
And when I meet folks who have the words and have the ability to tell stories in words and other sort of media spaces outside of food proper, it's fascinating about to get them to talk about process.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like maybe we start at the beginning. You Houston native. Um,
H-Town.
there's right. There's a particularity about Texas, right? A kind of I don't know. It feels like a y'all got everything. You got Juneteenth, you got the size of your state, you got this kind of very particular blackness that's adjacent to New
Mm-hmm.
Orleans. Just all this history, all this particularity about that place. So I don't know, maybe let's start with Texas.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love us starting with Texas because that is where it all started for me. So yes, I thank you everyone who's here. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and based in New York City, but I'm actually in Texas right now. And so, I think being from a place like Houston, which is one of the most diverse cities in the nation, I think being a Black person in a city like this, yes, to your point, I think you come up with a different notion and a different way of understanding the world around you. And I think that that's something that's kind of carried over into my writing. And so, from an early age, my mom she's now retired, but she was a third grade teacher. And so she and I were the two in the household geeking out over history and writing and books. She would take me to the Museum of Fine Arts on Thursdays. It was free. And she was just kind of like, it was constantly this need for her to expose me to culture, to expose me to my own blackness, and to expose me to the world around me. Houston is a very immigrant populated city, which is, I love that. And therefore, the food that I came up with, it was just I had the black food in my house. My parents are from Louisiana, which I'll get to, but I had that black food in my household, and I was surrounded by pho restaurants, and I was surrounded by West African food. I was surrounded by, tons of Southeast Asian foods, pasta restaurants, Eastern European food. It was just all here. And so I think because of that, and because of my blackness and it being so deep in the South, my parents are from Louisiana. As far as we know, my family was enslaved in the Carolinas. So we've been here, we've been in the South since we've been in this country. And as far as I'm concerned, we developed this part of the country. So yeah, I think that's always on my mind. I think the idea of respecting other people, just like I was told to respect, both the people in my culture and the people not in my culture, I think that carries over into my writing. So it's interesting you talked about process because something I try to do when it comes to writing and specifically interviewing sources. From the get-go, I was always kind of going at people, or at least attempting to, from a really respectful manner. As far as I'm concerned, when I interview someone, for me, it's my job, but as far as I'm concerned, I am taking someone's time. Like, they're offering their time to speak with me. And so whether it's a Black person that I'm talking to, like my recent story about the famous fish market, or if I'm talking to someone from Indonesia, I make it very clear, that I'm thanking them for agreeing to speak with me and thanking them for taking out the time to tell this story. And because of that, I'm always really interested about the cultural aspects of whatever story I'm doing. I'm always interested about their history, about what motivates them to do the work that they're doing, whether they're a chef, whether they're someone in the kitchen, whether they're an artist, whatever the case is. And it's funny you brought up Upworthy, because everything this year, as far as I'm concerned, feels like 10 years. Like, I'm thinking about January, and that feels like a long time ago. But
Mm-hmm.
so, of course, Upworthy feels like such a long time ago. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, at that point, I was able to gain so much really great experience about reaching out to sources nationally and sometimes abroad, and figuring out how to tell a good story while also making sure the people at the heart of the story felt both respected and like they were presented in a truthful manner.
Well, I feel like so this, you know, little box of a human in the middle of Texas with all these influences. When did you think that storytelling was going to be your jam? Because I mean, educationally, I mean, you a Fulbright scholar. When I read that part, I was like, I thought about I don't know if you know Shakira Assembly out of San Francisco. She's another person who she used a Fulbright scholarship to go to Italy and sort of do their food masters in food studies. And it was just I'm always interested when I find people who use these academic spaces to make those like those particular tools in the arsenal, right? Like those you're able
Right.
to sort of I think sometimes in the food space, we don't always have access to or we're not always equipped with that kind of expansive vocabulary of like, resources and sort of influences. And so when did you think, yeah, I'm gonna be a storyteller?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started storytelling as a kid. It was kind of always with me. I was not a math person. I was always reading and writing, both like for joy and, at school, just really, really loved it. And that was the side of academics that I really kind of thrived on. I was kind of encouraged by my mom to continue writing. I would say, I think I knew I wanted to be a journalist in high school, but at that point things had really shifted, and it was very much so get something that's stable, do something that'll work. And so for a long time I had this idea that I would probably try and be a lawyer, something like that. Um, that did not last very long. I got to college. I changed majors probably, I think, 3 times ultimately, and finally was like, you know what? I know what I'm here to do. I know that to some level I need to be storytelling, and I knew that I wanted travel to be an essential part of it. So I transferred universities. I got engaged in what I wanted to. I ended up deciding to take a minor in African American studies, and I decided to take a minor in international studies. Always, to me, and this kind of goes back to growing up to Houston, my Blackness was always parallel to my interests in other cultures and in other societies. And so for me, global international studies was the first I took on, but deciding to get a minor in African American studies was me really digging into what I had always been interested in and what was always just kind of inherent in me. And it's actually how I ended up leaving the country for the first time. So, in college, I started really pursuing journalism, really taking it seriously. I ended up going to Ghana, and being in Ghana for the first time, it was my first time out of the country. I just had so many stories to tell, and I had so many questions that I wanted answered. And one of those questions actually turned into a story I did last year that I'll talk about a little bit later. But from there, I think that both that trip and being in school and being around working journalists really taught me that A, this is a career I can do, and B, I don't see enough of myself here. I don't see enough people doing storytelling right now at this moment who look like me, and I wanted to make sure that both my voice was heard and that young Black women coming behind me also felt like they could do this kind of work. And so it took me a lot of different places. You brought up Fulbright, so I went to Indonesia a year after I graduated college and had an incredible experience there. In between kind of this period, I spent some time in Europe. I spent time teaching English in the Alps. I kind of oscillated between countries and between experiences, and all of it just, again, really has shifted my way of how I think about society. It has shifted my way, I think, how I've seen Blackness, and both
Mm.
it internally and how I see myself externally, like how I feel others see me, and what I think about that has shifted over time, and particularly during travel experiences. And yeah, so all that to say, to answer your original question, it really kicked off in college, and I ended up getting my master's in IR in journalism. And that's when I started kind of working for bigger publications and really started writing about food specifically. My food writing did not start until grad school, because I did not realize that food writing, A, was a viable career, and B, that Black women could and would be doing it. And it took me some time to kind of get to that point, but I'm glad I'm here.
So I would love it if you talk a little bit about NYU, because there's a really interesting thing. I mean, I found it fascinating that you found food through a place like NYU, where their food safety program is, I mean, one of the only ones I know of that is far enough along to have deference paid to it. But in a lot of ways, like in terms of the food studies part, like I think culturally, they have a lot. There's a lot that is possible there, and so I'm wondering like what the correlation between the journalism program and the food studies program is, because it just feels like there's this wealth of, there should be this wealth of interplay and also like cross pollination, but you have the best of everything at your disposal. Like, how is that kind of interplaying?
Yes, I really got blessed at NYU. I think it's interesting you bring up the food studies, because I have actually worked with food studies for stories, but my degree is actually in international relations and
Mm-hmm.
journalism. So what really allowed me to do food reporting was being in the journalism program. I was essentially split between two departments. Um, and it was housed under this program called the Global Journalism Program. And so what
Okay.
was core to it was that you would travel during your program and do a thesis project. So at this point, I'd been doing some travel writing. I mean, food has just been a part of me, of course, from my upbringing, my love of it and my appreciation of it. But I did not realize that it was a real career that I could potentially do. I didn't come up with a professional cooking upbringing. I'm a home cook. Like, I did not, I didn't think that I belonged in that space, if that makes sense. And so I'd gotten back from Indonesia, which, being in Southeast Asia, I mean, I'd grown up with Southeast Asian food in Houston for sure. Definitely not Indonesian food specifically. There are like two restaurants here, but I'd grown up around a lot of this food, and a lot of my people in my cohort, a lot of friends that I made, were Southeast Asian. We all had different backgrounds, and being there, I think I was really just kind of like, I need to write about this. This makes me feel something. This makes me feel something. There are stories here. And what I really started to notice was that food was about so much more than how does this taste. Food is about imperialism and colonialism and politics, and who's growing the food and where the food is going in the world and who gets to taste certain food. And I realized that there were stories to be told. So I will say this. It's interesting you bring up grad school, because my program director very much so wanted the more human rights stories, very outside of food, and didn't necessarily want that focus. And I did do that part of it, but food and trouble kept calling me back. So when I went to Ghana, this is going back to my first time there, I decided to go to Ghana during my thesis program, which this is now 6 years after my first trip. And when I'd gone the first time, I had this question. I had jollof rice the first time, and I was like, this is just like jambalaya. And I just kind of said it out loud, and the server laughed. He just thought it was hilarious. He's like, that's what y'all always say when y'all come here. The taste of jambalaya, they're connected. And so I wanted to know more about that. And so I had this question. I was like, I wonder if there's a way I can really dig into this look at this from an academic perspective, and ended up going to a workshop in San Francisco with Feet in Two Worlds. So I went to that workshop. It was an audio workshop. I wanted to continue developing my audio skills ahead of this trip to Ghana. And I just decided to bring it up during a pitch session. And I'd written out this pitch, wasn't sure where it would go, thought I'd just get some feedback. They ended up loving the idea. So I ended up doing a podcast and a written piece out of that question. And I would say that that was my first really, really major food piece of work. And I had just the most incredible time doing that reporting. And I think it just opened it all up. It was like all the experiences I had before, the travel, the journalism assignments in college, the different things that program directors had told me, the Fulbright. It's like it all came together in that project, and it all kind of made sense. And it was like, oh, it's all, I have been taking on these opportunities and experiences to get here and to tell these types of stories. And so I love doing that. It was one of the hardest things I've done. It was not part of my graduate program. So it was in addition to all this work I was doing to get through school. And it was amazing. And I think, you know, I had such an incredible time. I was able to interview Dr. Jessica B. Harris for that piece. I talked to a lot of different folks, spoke to people at the Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. I got to talk to people in places that I had admired so deeply for so long.
Yeah.
To hyper focus this piece of work on our food and on our history and on our culture. And that to me meant more really than me being able to do the work. It was about getting able to engage with our community and give our community the time and the reporting that it deserves. So yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring up Dr. Harris, because I have this, I'm interested in this intergenerational conversation around food media. I read your piece covering Tony Tipton Martin's Jubilee. And it was a really it was a super thoughtful piece on a book that I think could easily get dismissed as this kind of collection of modern soul food if you weren't paying attention. And it was so much that you were able to dig deep in, and as a reported piece, it was I got to write about her, but I did it as an interview. So a lot of it was in her words. But for you to be able to sort of really add the layer of analysis that you did was amazing. And I guess I'm wondering, especially as you're talking about essentially coming to, like, using your journalistic background, using the degrees that you just worked so hard for, and sort of making this sort of stand to tell stories in the food space. What are you thinking about in terms of the landscape, its history, and kind of what your responsibility is to that legacy? Because I think a lot about it, and it's something that kind of it tends to inform my choices. But I'm wondering if you're thinking about that at all.
So that's a really great question. I'm gonna sit on it for a second, because I'm just on how to start responding. I think legacy in particular to me is really is one of the key words in that question. This kind of goes into just the general current racial justice conversations we're having that Black people have had all of our lives, that white people are now aware of. There were certainly times when I questioned, I was like, for example, food, like it was very white and very male. And I wasn't sure if it was, a viable career in the sense of doctor and lawyer and all those things. I never thought that Black people couldn't be in certain spaces, if that makes sense, at the same time.
Yes.
Never thought that, because I was raised in a household where I knew that Black people had been chefs, doctors, lawyers, had created things, had invented things, had given this country X, Y, Z, and some, right? And so I grew up knowing that. That was never a question for me. Certainly we're also learning different things about our history, certainly in Tony Tipton Martin's book, but like the idea that we were in these spaces, creating this level of dining, engaging in these communities, having these parties that Tony Tipton Martin describes so eloquently. I didn't think we weren't doing that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
That said, I know that many people, on the other hand, probably did think that. And what Toni does so beautifully and was just so impressive is she gets these stories. She not only gets these stories that maybe Black people are a bit more aware of than others, but she gives a name to them. Like, I love that at every twist and turn that she can, she finds the name of the chef. She knows who ran Sam's Tavern. She knows the chef that she looks for, the chef that created Bisquick. She knows who these people are, and she finds their stories. And I think that is what is such an essential part of food writing and Black culinary story. And you know, the work that you do is finding the names of these people who have given us our food and our culture and have given us the things that we now are able to engage and indulge in. And so with that book, it's a big part of why I was so impressive, aside of the fact that it's just absolutely beautiful. Like, it's just a
Mm-hmm.
stunning piece of work. It's a
Yes.
piece of art. Like, it's beautiful to look at. But it was just such a wonderful read because it was like reading a history book, a really well written storytelling version of a history book and reading about my people. And so that said, when I'm doing my work and when I'm covering a chef or a cookbook author or whoever is doing this particular work, for me, legacy is really important. I know that this story is going to outlast all of us. What do I want people to think about when they read this story in 100 years, like we're reading stories from hundreds of years ago? You know, what do I want people to take away from this piece of work long after our time here? And what do I want them to remember about Blackness in this moment? And so with the Toni to Tim Martin piece, with the Toni to Tim Martin piece, I think, you know, I'm writing this. It's interesting because I had that piece online when the book came out, and the piece was killed by another publication. You know, things happen, but I was heartbroken. I was really
Yeah.
heartbroken because I loved it so much. But you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like everything happens when it needs to. It ended up coming out around Juneteenth, and you know, we just kind of gone through the very beginning of this new racial reckoning and racial justice moment. And so writing it at that point, kind of rewriting what I'd written in December and analyzing it from this place was really important because it was looking at the book in a new lens. It was looking at the book in a new space and time. And I wanted to make sure readers understood that yes, this book is important, it's beautiful, but it's more than that. Like, this is a part of our history right now.
Perfect. Yeah. 100% amen to all of that. Um, I think I asked that question because I'm thinking a lot about, like, I think about something like Toni. Like, there's so much. She's a hardcore journalist, right? Like, her life in writing, her life in storytelling, um, spans so much time, and she is in like a lot of important ways has given us the language. The point you made earlier, the language that we use to think about and talk about these food ways, has been sort of infused into the marrow of her work. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess I'm wondering about someone who you are. I think about. I mean, honestly, when I started to think about your work and sort of deep dive into your background, it felt very parallel to her story. And I guess I'm wondering. Well, because there's this very particular journalistic posture you're doing work from that isn't necessarily beholden to the food space. Like, there's some
Yeah.
folks who write in food who do it solely from a place of culinary work, right? And there's a you you just tack it from a different posture. And I guess I'm wondering, you just, all of this time, right? Fulbright scholarship, NYU, all of this very particular and a way of storytelling that she talks a lot about taking yourself out of the story. And these particular journalistic standards that might not be that might not serve the spirit of a story, or being
Mm.
as beholden to culture as your writing just feels like it tends to be. How are you thinking about essentially creating your own layers to that new language? Because it feels like that's what we're doing. Like, Portia Wilson is here. Like, it's so many writers, so many dope Black food creators who are giving us a new language for how to tell stories. And I'm wondering, with your perspective, so the angle you attack it from, how are you thinking about that work, given the conventional wisdom of your degrees?
Yeah, yeah. Really, again, really great question. It's, you know, I look at this generation of writers, and I'm so thankful to be a part of it. To be in a generation with Portia Wilson and so many others here who have been doing such great work and continue to do it. It Finding my voice is something that I am continuing to grapple with, and it's interesting. So there are two things that I think about. Because I've been trained as a journalist, particularly in undergrad. I initially came up under the teachings of objectivity, of keeping yourself out, of looking at it from this perspective, which these conversations are now shifting, particularly in racial justice. And it's definitely the piece about taking yourself out is definitely something I move back and forth with, because there's so many stories when I want to make sure that like the person I'm interviewing is the center, and I'll have editors sometimes be like, well, what does this mean to you? How does this connect to you? And I put myself in there. And so it's something I've actually had to push myself on a little bit more, to put myself in the story a little bit more and figure out how that shifts my voice and what people expect from my writing. Another caveat about this is that that every sector, right? Like it works in every aspect of media and journalism, but how it shows up and what that means in terms of determining your writing style and your voice, I think it can change and can shift. And so I'm still trying to figure that out, I think, for myself over time. I think the key for me is ensuring that I am centering the people that I'm interviewing, centering their voices and their stories, and making it clear why I'm the one writing it. That makes sense.
No, 100%. Y'all, I don't know if folks who are just joining us, we have the blessing of Kayla Stewart talking about food writing, journalism, and sort of storytelling. And I guess we're doing pretty good on time, but I wanna make sure if you guys have any questions, we'll save a little time at the end. Drop them in the comments or put them in the question bar. Um, I would love it if you could talk maybe about this notion of travel, because I mean, your writing is beautiful. I mean, y'all should KaylaStewart.com, go and check out her very long list of bylines. But your photography is really beautiful. Like, there's a really tender way to have with subject in your writing and in your photography. And I guess I don't know, I'm just fascinated by process, and I'm constantly trying to get better as a writer, trying to sort of exercise those muscles to be a more effective storyteller. I guess I'm wondering, you know the landscape. I mean, you have witnessed the food space, the food media space sort of, I won't say implode, but certainly have to have a reckoning with itself, a kind of a
Yeah.
have to really kind of have a come to Jesus. And I'm wondering, as someone who is sort of you enter this space really intentionally at a interesting moment, right? The moment you decide this is going to be the lane you're going to try and sort of not try, but sort of occupy full time, like, everybody's having come to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
I'm sure you have many
Yeah.
thoughts. I would love if you could talk a little bit about that.
Definitely. So so I'll talk about this moment first because I think that's really interesting. So my schedule is kind of crazy. So I've been working full time at a job that's entirely separate from food to pay for my degree at NYU. So I was working full time, going to school, and trying to really dig into freelancing, increasing my freelancing and freelancing for publications I'd really admired. And so I was doing I was doing work, freelance work in addition to that, but it really began to take off when I finally graduated. Of course, the weekend after I finally graduated is when things changed greatly in our country. And so,
Right.
and food media just shifted entirely. So I'm kind of finally making a little bit of a jump into this industry, and everything just kind of explodes. And I don't say that as about, what led to it obviously is horrible and tragic, but I think the explosion was long overdue. It was something that was coming, and it's something that's necessary. I think what's happening in food media, the overwhelming whiteness, the overwhelming sexism and homophobia, like all these things that are happening and that we're finally calling out, it's necessary and it will make this industry better for all of us, and it will make much better media to digest and to consume. And so, yeah, it's definitely a strange time to be entering into, but jumping into it. But I'm grateful for it because I think, again, all of these conversations and all of these changes are essential. Um, I think in terms of process, it definitely, it's interesting because on the one hand, we have the shift in media, but it's also this pandemic, right? So my process has changed during this. Like, I'm so used to doing in-person interviews and kind of almost making that a requirement for me, if possible, if I'm in the right city. And changing that up, rethinking how I might do podcasts, rethinking what the next steps are for travel and how I can do things safely and in a way that people can understand and relate to. Like, all of these are things that I now think about in addition to how I was already writing. um, I think for me, one of the biggest things I always say when it comes to like my writing process and how I think about stories is that I read a lot, and I don't only read food and travel media. Like, that's a big thing, and that's something that I have heard from my own professors, but just is something that I do. And I think because of the reading I do, I'm a very different writer than I was 2 years ago. And I hope to be a very different writer in 2 years from where I am now. Like, I hope to
Yeah.
continue flexing these muscles and practicing over time. And I'm hoping that this moment will allow for that because I'm becoming so much more aware of other things as well, and other artists and writers and just Black people and people of color doing such incredible work. And I think it will make us all so much better and smarter in our respective industries.
That's an interesting segue. What are you reading right now? Like, what's on your shelf that you just like is kind of staying with you and percolating right now?
Great question. So I have right now, this is an older memoir, but I'm finally getting around to it. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah is on
Yes.
right now. So I'm reading that. I have The Vanishing Half next from Britt Bennett. And I have Yaga Sai's new book, which I am blanking on the name. It's a new book. She did Homegoing, and she just released her new book, which is on the way to me. So I'm really looking forward
Okay.
to a particular text. So yeah, a little like a mix, some fiction, some nonfiction. Those are the books that are on there right now.
Yes. I don't know. I've been rereading Imani Perry's Finding
Mm,
the Rain, because it's something so interesting about the way she's transformed memoir. I mean, sort of like, or sort of the biography, because like it's third person, and I'm thinking about it relative to like so many of these calling figures that we love, right? The Vernon Groves and what would it look like if you used this like personal form of biography to, I don't know, contextualize like the food space through the lens of the trajectory of a life. It's so interesting. So yeah, shout out to disparate reading. It informs so much. Um,
I love that.
oh, that's so good. Like you know what? I would love it if we could talk a little bit about. There are a lot of folks who are on this in this space. Some folks who are writers specifically, but a lot of chefs and a lot of folks who, in the midst of this food media reckoning, a lot of chefs are getting called on to be subjects of stories, to maybe write, and maybe you don't have any reference point, right? And now I'm a dilettante compared to a lot of you all who have so much experience, right? But the call to tell stories, I think, is a pure one, and um, I guess I'm wondering if you have any, not sort of advice for a new food writer, but what are the things we should be thinking about if you want to tell stories, if you want to be in these streets for real? Um, not all of us are going to have time and resources to go to NYU and to sort of take time
Yeah.
out to go back to school, but like, I mean, are there any books we should be reading? Are there any sort of spaces we should be paying attention to that maybe have some, I don't know, starting points to kind of get better at storytelling?
Absolutely. And I'll first say, like, I'm certainly grateful for NYU. It definitely opened up some doors and gave new connections. And I want to say again, I was able to go to NYU because I worked at NYU and that's was able to get my tuition paid for.
I
So
mean,
yeah, so
well, well,
I
hold on. I mean,
uh,
cause side note too, I think
yeah,
an interesting thing that we don't talk about enough is that a lot of these comrades, a lot of these folks who are telling the most dynamic stories and are out here giving us these words that feed us and are putting themselves in spaces and in just in community with people who aren't necessarily the most, I don't know. It takes a lot for to do what you guys do, and are doing it part time, are doing it in addition to jobs that have to sustain you. And so just I think about so many, I mean, a lot of our elders as well, right? Who give us these tomes, give us these jewels, give us these pieces that really inform so much of the landscape we all are benefiting from, but who didn't do it to make money and didn't really just had to do it on kind of under duress. But all that to say, I would love. I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I just that was a point we made earlier. And I was like that, like we don't talk enough about the fact that a lot of folks who are serious and are trained to do this work can't do it full time.
absolutely. And I will say, I'm going to actually dig into NYU a little bit more if y'all don't mind. So one, I'll say I was one of two Black people in my program. In the IR department, I was the only Black person. And in the full global journalism program, I was one of two out of 17. I was the only one working full time. Um, I yeah, my experience at NYU again, I feel very blessed, and I'll get to this. I studied under one semester Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was a writer in
Mm,
residence while I was there,
okay.
and I was able to take his course. And as many of you know, Ta-Nehisi Coates did not go to college. Like one of the questions he asked during our first class, he asked us why we were there because from his perspective, he was like, I
Not
don't
trolling y'all.
yeah, it's very much him. Him question. He was like, I don't understand going to school for writing, and I understand his perspective absolutely. And to be honest, I tell people this like a lot of times. Very true to these types of schools. They'll send students of color to me to ask about my experience, and I tell them, I'm like, look, if you don't have this program paid for, I would not suggest it. Like, I don't think you need to go to a private school to be a good writer. And I'll say, when you're asking about process and how to join the writing community, from my perspective, writing is a muscle that you have to flex repeatedly to get it to grow, to be as strong as you want it to be. You can take all the classes, you can go to all the courses, you can pay for the, $70,000 degree. It will not work until you work. And so, in terms of getting into this industry, I just, I like, you have to work for it. It's very much so. Again, I went into what I was interested in and what really called me, which has always been food and travel. And I built on that experience. I continued going to restaurants that I loved, talking to my community. So, like I said, I'm from Houston, Texas, but I've been based in Harlem for the last I've been based in Harlem for about 4 years, and in between
What
5 years.
side? What side of town? I'm on the east side.
Oh, West Harlem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in a barrio. We gotta meet
Okay.
up
Oh,
when you get
so we
back.
have to link up when I'm back in town. Okay. We definitely have to link up. I for some, well, it wouldn't have been far anyways, but I thought you were out in New Jersey.
No.
Yes, absolutely, we will connect. So yeah, I mean, I've been in Harlem, and the fish market, for example, that I did a story on recently. I've been going there since I've been in Harlem, and getting to know people in the neighborhood, learning about the stories of the people doing this work, talking to them, tipping them, making sure that they know who you are, making sure that they feel appreciated and valued for their service, because many of them are so underpaid. And that was long before COVID. So, those are the types of things that you start doing, you start building. And then from a writing perspective, reading to me is so just essential. I think in reading things that have nothing to do with your work, like definitely read the food writing books, read your favorite writers, read from different cultures. That is essential, absolutely. But read everything. Like, read things, read about economics, read about tech, be aware of these things. It changes your language. It changes your understanding of how to write certain things. Your sentence structures will change. That's really essential. And so I would say doing that and then just getting to work. Something that I did, and I'll say, so you mentioned Upworthy. So that is where that was actually my first media job. I started as a research fellow, and you know, of course, I think like many young journalists wanted to write for the New York Times one day. And
Mm.
so for a long time, it felt, for there was a period of time I really felt like that wasn't going to happen. I was in a point where like nobody was answering the freelancing calls. I was kind of, you know, I'm in my 20s
Yeah.
and everybody knows how the 20s are. So just like a period of my 20s when things are being things. Um, and I just had to keep going. I really had to keep going. I had to keep emailing people. I had to keep getting to know people in my neighborhood um, and in my community. And I will say, because I was lucky enough to go to NYU, I did definitely take advantage of like every opportunity I possibly could. You know, I connected with my professors. Because, you know, with NYU being in the city, you have a lot of people who know certain people. I learned about the freelancing networks. And I studied the work of people I really admired. So I read, you know, the best American food writing books over the past few years. I was constantly reading, you know, my favorite cooking websites. I was in the kitchen myself.
Right.
Try new things. So, yeah, all of those things are really important and really essential when you're talking about breaking into the space, and I think are applicable. You know, even if you don't want to be a food writer, that also, you know, I think it also applies. And I'm seeing, Portia's message. Yes, pitching is absolutely a muscle that has to continue being worked for sure. It's
Yeah.
something I'm still learning and still developing. I think I will be developing for a long time. So yes, it definitely takes practice for sure.
Oh, so good. Okay, so again, y'all, we can leave a little time at the end for questions. We got a question, Monifa Dio, out of the Bay Area, really brilliant chef, and an interesting storyteller in her own right. She was asking about inspiration. Like this moment feels really particular. I think you know it's easy to sort of talk about um inspiration in kind of this broad way, but like how are you digging deep right now? Like the fortitude, what's inspiring you to kind of still stay in this dumpster fire of industries?
That's real. That's real. So it sounds very cheesy, but
No.
my first the reason I love food is because I was in the kitchen with my mom making gumbo or making jambalaya or making crawfish etouffee. And so for me, turning my phone off and cooking some food is something that I do to just like become inspired and to kind of fall in love with the art again and to feel something. Um,
Mm,
Cooking for my family in New York, I live with my sister. So I would cook for her a lot over the time. And we're back home now with the rest of our siblings in my family. But cooking for my family um, and having my playlist, like I have my tunes, I have my albums I still go back to, old albums, some new albums. Those are things I do to kind of take a break and debrief. And I've actually, I'm a runner, but I have recently gotten into cycling in the past year or so. So
okay.
in Houston, I can't do this. I'm really struggling without my bike because Houston's bike lanes aren't real. But in New York, I am often biking over at the Hudson River, which is just wonderful. And so just getting outside. I think the biggest thing for me is regardless of what kind of like self-care inspirational activity I'm doing, I make sure my phone is off outside of the music. Like I turn it on airplane mode. I take a break from Twitter. I get offline and just, you know, take a breather. And I don't say that to say like you need to be informed, like
But
be
you also
informed.
need respite. Yeah.
Yes. Also, you need, yeah, exactly. You need rest. You need some time away. And so that's kind of a way I'm able to be like, okay, things are really crazy, but right now at this moment, I'm okay. And I'm going to do this for myself or do this for people I love. And for this moment, that's going to have to work right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Um, so I don't want to. We are coming up on the last little bit of time, and I want to get into your talks. I mean, I think that someone who is as thoughtful and is intentional about your practice as you are going to have some really fascinating conversations. So, Kayla is going to be joining Black Food Folks to host her own talks. And what are the parameters for your conversations? I feel like there's I mean, I think that so much of what Clay and Colleen have created here has really kind of been initially, I think, was just about kind of feeling connected. We were all in this like shock mode. Like, COVID hits and we all at home, and so this space became this really particular kind of fellowship, and that's beautiful. But I think
Yeah.
some of the things that they're doing that's really powerful. Is really kind of getting more specific about these conversations. We got the Thomases on Wednesdays, kind of talking about. They've been doing a lot of couples conversations that have been dope. And we're talking about process. We got the brilliant Mavis and Cicely on Mondays with the Drink Tank. Um, you know, just I think the hosts are going to become much more intentional about the kinds of chats that they're going to be hosting. So, if you could just talk a little bit about what you got planned for us, because we can't wait.
Absolutely. So yes, shout out to Clay and Colleen because this network has just been fantastic. And when you were talking about resources earlier, Black Food Folks is one. Like looking
Right.
at jobs and opportunities and people looking for freelancers. Like absolutely, Black Food Folks has given me so much. So shout out to them for creating the space, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of it and hosting. So it's interesting, something you brought up. I think for me, one thing I really am looking forward to is bringing on folks, from different regions, which I think certainly we've done and are doing, but even kind of getting folks from quote unquote flyover states, but from places where maybe there aren't as many Black folks in the area, and getting people on to talk about their experiences, whether it be in the kitchen or in food media. And in particular, I'm working right now networking with a couple of groups. I really want to talk to Black farmers. So we've been talking
Yeah.
a big aspect of food media. I think we're talking about more is talking to workers as opposed to chefs at restaurants, which is something I'm trying to get better at. Is not something I've been good at for sure, and it's something I'm trying to improve. Again, COVID even makes that a little bit harder because it's not like
Yeah.
you just go into the kitchen, and ask to talk to people, but making sure that we're illuminating voices from around the industry. And I want to start at where the food starts, which is, on these farms. And in particular, as we're talking about reparations, as we're talking about economic justice, as we're talking about what Black folks have given to the United States and what we are owed, I really want to talk to the Black people that are reclaiming this land,
Yeah.
making sure that Black children are not living in these food deserts and can access fruits and vegetables and good food, and that people are paid equitably for it. And so I'm really wanting to make sure that we bring in Black farmers. There's Soul Fire Farms, which is in New York. There are a couple places down here in the South, a hog farm in Georgia. So I'm wanting to make sure we bring those folks on. We're hoping to talk to the wonderful Tony Martin at some point. So
Yeah.
we have some really good folks stopping by. And, I'd also love to hear of what people are interested in from Black food folks and what they feel like they'd love to know about, or people in the industry that they'd like to hear from.
Yeah. Definitely. We all gonna be riveted to tune in. Do you have a set time yet, or are you thinking like a day a week that's gonna be your go-to, or is it sort of?
So yes, I do have a set time. So it's going to be every other Wednesday, and I believe it's going to be starting
Hey.
next week. Yes, so we will be on 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, 1 p.m. Eastern, and we will make sure to send that out to folks. We have more information, but yeah, every other week you can catch me
Hey.
here with a guest. Less talking for me, we're talking for the other folks, and yeah.
That's gonna be dope. All right, y'all. We got about 10 minutes. We got the very brilliant Jackie Summers on at 4. So we want to be respectful of that time. But y'all better drop your questions if you have any questions for Kayla. If you please follow her here on Instagram and KaylaStewart.com. You can check out all of her beautiful photography, her legion of bylines to get into how stunning her writing is, and um, just how cool her storytelling is. And just, I don't know, I'm so interested in the way you're going to frame conversations, because I think I don't know, maybe to finish off, we could talk a little bit about sort of like audio storytelling. We got Portia, and her podcast is
Yes.
beautiful and so like thorough and beautiful. I guess I'm wondering because I mean I feel like this is I mean these conversations to my mind have been a form of podcasting, and the power of them is I'm thinking a lot about digital archive lately, and I guess I'm wondering what you think of that space. I mean I remember my first kind of connection to like storytelling in audio form was like the Kitchen Sisters on NPR, and so they were just so I don't know. So they were speaking my language. They were just nerdy enough and just kind of curious enough to be telling these disparate stories. But no, our reference point for audio storytelling, like WPA, NPR, and like just these kind of where storytelling becomes a public trust. Thanks so much about folks like you who think about journalism from such a disciplined posture. Like there comes this point where like it's less about like you as the subject and more about like the responsibility of storytelling. And I think those audio forms is so interesting. Like you made this point earlier, and I got my life because I honestly sort of see the work we do as having to be more beholden to history, right? We are defining what history's going to say about this moment, and so I'm thinking about all these podcasts, all of these like sort of audio spaces that are gonna feel evergreen, gonna feel timeless in the same way, and researchable, like searchable in that way. So what I don't know, are you thinking? Where are you thinking about? Is there a podcast coming from you? Are you thinking about audio storytelling in that way?
Yes, I can say yes to both of those questions. I can't unfortunately go into a ton of detail about the podcast that's coming up, but
She
it
said,
does.
no, no, no. She said, I can't give it all to you.
I was
Info will drop.
I will definitely get more information. I'm like, I don't know, I forgot what the thing said that I saw it, so let's be careful. But I get
But it's
the
coming, thank God.
no, but I can. But yes, there will be podcasts coming from me, and it's something I'm working on. I have not done one since last year, and again, for those who just came on, it was tracing the history of jambalaya rice, which I grew up with, to jollof rice. I took me around the world. I went to DC, New York, Houston, and Ghana, and it was quite an experience. But so I bring that up. I just did a workshop on interviewing because I'm also trying to grow as an interviewer in my work. And the most interesting stat, apparently 80% of interviewees are white. And it is a stat, I don't know where they got the stat from, but I was thinking about it and I actually don't know that I'm that surprised. So the
Well, because
voice.
who do we think of as expert? Who do we
Yes.
think of as
Exactly. So I was thinking about it. I was like, that seems outrageous. But then I was like, oh, wait. But then again, it may not be that far off. So at a minimum, it looks like the people that are being interviewed and the people whose voices are being heard are white people. And I think about that in the podcasting space because one really interesting thing in terms of doing that jambalaya jollof rice story, a blessing that I had was that I got to do an audio version and a written version. And I learned how different storytelling is when you're doing audio versus written, and kind of the benefits of telling a story by way of audio. And when I
right?
think one of the most obvious benefits, it's that podcast was filled with Black voices. It was Black people telling their stories. My mother was on that podcast. Dr. Harris was on it. A speaker from of African American history was on it. It was all Black people talking about their food, what their food meant to them, and the history of that food. And for me, I think it's really critical to me in my work to, whatever I'm assigned to do, whether it's talking about Black food or talking about food from people of color or immigrant communities, I want to make sure that I am asking as many people of color as possible about their opinions, about their expertise, about what they know about their food. And I think, it's something I try to do in writing, but I think I'm especially conscious of it in podcasting because, you brought up NPR, all of these media organizations that are trusted and that, have done fabulous work, but that they still have a ways to go in terms of both who is on staff at those organizations and who's asking those questions, as well as who's getting to respond to them. And so, yeah, that's such a great question. And it absolutely is something that I think about. And in preparing for the podcasting work I have coming up, as I'm working now, it's looking for, when you talk about process, when I'm doing research for a story, I'm pulling reports and other pieces that have been written about it and all of those things. And so when I'm deciding, how am I going to source the story? Who am I going to reach out to? I am very much so intentional about, is this a person of color? Is this a woman? Is this a queer person? Like, looking at all of these facets of identity and trying to figure out, making sure that my story is rigorous, making sure that it's accurate, and making sure that it reflects the people in their communities that are involved. So yes, definitely on my mind.
Yes. I feel like that's such a good way to end. It's like you put a perfect bow on what has been a joyful conversation. I know we all can't wait to come back with you every other Wednesday, to get our lives and to meet the people you introduce us to. Yeah, just thank you for your time, and I can't wait to see what you do.
Of course. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. This was a delight to do. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll be in contact, but
Yeah.
yeah, man. Thank you so much for your time, and all right, I'll see you.
Sounds good. Bye bye.
Bye. All right, y'all. That's pretty great. So I'm gonna jump off. Got the very. Can we get into how beautiful Jackie Summers is? But anyway, Jackie is back with us in 5 minutes. He's got Joseph Stitchcomb. So get your life for his happy hour, and I will see you guys next week.